Okay. Okay, let's start with the mechanism. We believe this should be done, like we said, the school, it says so, will start at an early stage of school, but we'll start it very gently and we'll make it more significant as the kids grow older and actually can understand more the issue of being criticism and skeptical. I think that makes sense. Now, what are we going to teach them or tell them? What does it mean to be skeptical? Let's be very clear about this. It doesn't mean not to obey the parents. Okay, we're going to tell them that regardless, you will obey your parents if they eventually decide that this is something to do. So we think the question here is mostly not about things like the parent telling the child, you must come back at 10 p.m. and he says, I'm not sure about that. And that's not the issue, because eventually you say, yeah, well, you come at 10, so you may be skeptical if this was the right decision, but it happened. We think the more important and significant issue in this debate is about opinions. When your parent tells you that immigrants are ruining the country, or you hear them speak like that between themselves, even not telling you, or that black people are not as good as white people, or LGBT, and so on, this is where we want the children to be more skeptical and actually start to think for themselves and not accept it as automatic as they do today, and this is the problem. This is why this is so important. Why this is so important? Because I think we have today a problem in the world that people... What? Yes.
Don't schools already teach children that being against migrant migrants is bad and that violence is bad and stuff?
Yes, they do, but what we are focusing is to say that if your parent tells you this and will tell you why it's so important about parents, then you need to be skeptical, because parents have such a huge influence on the kids and what they perceive. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So why is this so important? Because we have a problem, we see this in the world. People tend to go after authoritarian populist leaders and actually take their word as is, and like Trump, like Putin, like Orban in Hungary, we see this as a problem. The rise of that, all those populistic parties is only possible when you have citizens that accept authority and want to go after authority and do not criticize what they say, do not really think, wait a second, like in Hungary is a classic example. He has a big anti-migrant campaign. Guess what? There are no immigrants in Hungary, but still they follow because the leader says so, and this is very bad. Secondly, people today are exposed to a huge amount of fake news and bullshit on the social media. We want citizens to be more critical, and when they read something, you say, wait a second, I know, I see it written, but does it make sense? Is it actually? We want to develop that sense of skepticism and critical thinking. We think this is extremely important for them to become better citizens and eventually overall work for the better of society in elections, in overall the way where society goes. No. Now, how do we know that today there's a problem that people are brainwashed today and don't even have a choice in what they believe in? How do we know that? I'll give you two examples. Again, it's coming from the home. This is why parents are important. For instance, people that are born to religious parents will 95% be religious. People born to secular, 95%. That shows, but overall we have like 50-50. That shows that there's no real choice involved. But actually this is brainwashed into you and engraved into you that you can't really think for yourself. And that's what we want to encourage people to think more for themselves. Also for political affiliation. We see a huge tendency which can only be explained by kind of brainwashing or deep influence from the home, and we want to prevent that. Now, why it is so important to do this as children? A few points on that. First, because we need to get them used to think critically from a very young age. This is what we call the anchoring effect. Things that you really get to be used to and think and get this as a habit of yours will stay with you for life. Things that you don't adapt at an early age will simply not be there. It's much more difficult to make you start thinking skeptically and critically after you have been brainwashed and you hold truths that are so deeply engraved in you, then it's very difficult to change. The brain is also less flexible. I mean, look at me. Try to change my opinions. It's just a matter of biology. That's why it's so important to start doing this as kids. Now we have two more points to show to you. Why specifically it's important to be skeptical about parental authority and why the schools should do this. This will complete our case about why this motion is so important. Before I continue, I will take closing.
The assumption for the whole case is that there exists a critical, rational common sense that is universally justifiable. They need to explain to us what kind of a critical opinion are they to teach in school.
I think that the ability to look at anything and look at it critically is universal. I'm not saying you should be progressive or you should be conservative. I'm just saying look at something and think for yourself. I mean, Kant said it before me. This is really universal. Yes, we have logic and rationale. We just ask you to use it and then come to your own conclusion and your own choices. So why parental authority is so important? First, because this is the most basic and the most absolute authority that children perceive and get. Why? It's very simple. They are born into this world where the parent is both omnipotent and omniscient, know all. This is a very strong authority that obviously any child will think that the parent cannot be wrong and the parent knows everything, and that's why if he says something, probably this is true. That's why it's so important. Kids totally accept what their parents tell them. And again, the example I brought you before about the religious versus non-religious proves this to a great extent. There's no real choice involved here. And finally, why it has to be the schools? 2 points. First, because this is the only place that can give some kind of counterweight to this tremendous parental authority. And we think this is important because teachers also get to have some authority in the eyes and the mind of the children, and that's important. And secondly, because this is exactly the duty of the school, to prepare the children for life and to be good, productive citizens in a democratic state, which means to think critically, to actually evaluate what they think, not follow authority blindly. And for those reasons, we think it's the school, it should be aimed towards parental authority. We have to start it early. We're very proud to propose.
I'd like to speak for the speech and now welcome first speaker for the
Is the panel ready? Panel, what we get from the last speaker is a very strange characterization of both how parents and children interact and how teaching of critical thinking works. Because teaching of critical thinking is not something that is brand new. It is something that exists generally in most schools to some degree, right? It exists when you study literature. Note that children are generally introduced to literature from quite a young age. They have to write feedback on it. They have to think about it. They interact with ideas such as authority. So this is something that children are interact with on a general level. What this specifically looks like is parents telling children to question what their parents are telling them, the ideas they get off their parents, and that does not mean what we get from their best case scenario about things like question what a parent says about how they view about their political or immigrants, right? So firstly, that's assuming that teachers themselves are somehow more moderate or liberal, because if we get the characterization that these parents are so controlling of children, I don't know why they don't send them to a religious school, or send them to a school where there are no immigrants, or send them to a school where the narrative is kind of like that. So I'm unsure at that level why you have this great impact of better citizens or children that are better prepared, right? But I think what we're actually going to bring you is bring you an actual realistic characterization of how this teaching looks and the huge impacts that this can have on both the parent-child relationship and the safety and development of a child, right? So firstly, I just want to characterize what does parental authority look like, right? So it generally takes the form of stuff like warnings or life lessons, right? And parents generally believe that they are doing the right thing from this authority. Why do they do this? Because they believe they have a lot of life experiences dealing with this. Maybe they're taking things that they've learned from their parents when they're growing up as when they were children, right? And it's on the same way that was given by that speaker, just that they have a more developed brain, they kind of think about things more rationally, they believe that their children can't understand those topics as well. So, and this is often enforced with authority. It's enforced by things that, just their sheer size or the control that they have of the children's lives in terms of economic control, or what the children is allowed to do, and it can be enforced with punishments. That's very important when we talk about the impacts later of this. But I just want to point out that when we think about critical thinking, right, I'm unsure from the last speaker as to why a child is able to differentiate, and this I like being critical about like a parent when they talk about like a political ideology or talk about a certain thing versus when a parent just gives them a warning about like not to stay out too late, right? Because I would imagine as a child, if we say that they have like a less developed brain, or like you're not going to be thinking as much about like those abstract thoughts. You're going to be thinking more about what affects your life. So when parental authority really kicks in for a child, it kicks in when they said, oh, you're not allowed to do this, or you're not allowed to eat sweets, you have to eat healthy, right? So I'm unsure if a child is able to make a huge distinction, but if they are, I think they're more likely to like see this in terms of how this affects like just their general life, and to be critical of how parental authority interacts with their own freedom. Because I mean that's a huge part of growing up, is you want to push these boundaries and you want to like have more freedom and understand who you are in the world, right? And I think importantly, like how this teaching looks like, right? So like for the parent and child relationships are vastly different in every situation, right? There's different things of like warnings, there's different things of like how parents like give trust or give like certain freedoms or certain punishments to children, right? The problem is how that authority can look very different to a teaching authority, is that in a classroom environment you have typically one teacher to maybe 25 to 30 students, right? So that does not mean that you can get like individual and nuanced like here's how you should like be critical of your parental authority given the situations, right? It means a general like here's how like you could like question or like argue with your parents, right? Even at like a low level, it has to be some form of that, like a young age, as to what like the characterization was given to that. So what that means is that like given that the teacher also has very similar authority, and that like they have things such as like you're told you have to follow your teacher, because there's also punishments that can exist, and that's often like your parents will tell you stuff like you have to listen to your teacher and stuff like that. But also on a similar level, just with like peer influence, like given the different nature of relationships between children and parents, when children talk to other children, they see like, oh, like I'm questioning my parental authority, and that means like because of that I'm able to like do things like stay out slightly later, or like my life seems to be getting slightly better. I think children probably see that and they think, oh, this is maybe the authority that I should be questioning, because like I seem to have like less freedoms as already exists, like as already mean what children push back against parents is often because of things like that, and this probably just encourages children to do that far more. So what are the impacts of this, right? So firstly, I think like at a low level it means like to some degree quite a lot of like communication breakdown between parents and children, right? Because as I've characterized, there is at like a basic level some questioning of authority of like parents, and that often can most commonly probably doesn't happen at like this sort of like political or critical or abstract level. That probably mostly happens when a child is just saying like there's a barrier in front of them and they're really questioning that authority, right? Because parents, as I've characterized, generally believe that they're doing the right thing because they have probably had that being told to them when they were children, or they believe that they've more experience, that they know better, right? So they're going to try harder to enforce that when a child is questioning that, right? So that means that you get to some degree of communication breakdown, and that like a parent is probably going to clamp down harder on a child who is like questioning that authority, and to put in more punishments to stop a child doing that. And this child getting this idea, I'll take you in a minute, getting this idea that like from their school and from like probably what they probably like likely misunderstood, given like the less developed brains thing, for like that like this is a very nuanced kind of like abstract reasoning that like their teachers seem to be like teaching them, like are like likely to like resist that from their parents. They're likely to be very resentful of that, like, and that leads to huge impacts of communication breakdown. But yeah, go for it.
Okay, so you believe that teachers who are themselves oftentimes parents will communicate this in such a way that kids will internalize it and be like, I'm just going to go drinking more.
No, because like I think what actually happens is that the way that this is done, firstly, and then like you try to like give like for a teacher to try to give like this thing to their own child, given their own relationship, they have a much better understanding of this. Whereas you're giving it to like people in general relationships you probably don't understand, and like the teacher has a lot of other things that they have to do. They're trying to work a job, they're trying to teach other things, right? So this is only getting a limited space of time. This does not mean this incredibly well developed message to people. And I think also, as I've characterized, children are likely to like see how this interacts with other children. So like how other children have this freedom, and given that they're being told to question the parental authority, when they see barriers in front of them, when they see they're like if another child is able to drink given a drink by their parents at the age of 14, and they see they don't have that, they think, oh well, like maybe this parental authority of my parents is wrong, maybe I should question this, maybe I should push back at that. And whether or not that child is successful, whether or not that child drinks more, it means you have communication breakdown with your parents. It means you have a build up of distrust in that relationship, because you're questioning that parental authority because you're being told to do that by a teacher who you also have a lot of respect for, right? It can also mean other things, right? It can mean if a child then believes this narrative and believes this idea that like, oh, they should be questioning parental authority, while also taking that in with their own minds about like their own freedom, their own enjoyment, which a child often cares about quite a lot when they interact with their parents. It can often mean things like a lower work ethic, and that like if like what often like children are very resentful for is like if like parents are like not letting them go out to play with their friends because they need to do homework and they need to get work done. It means that maybe a child is more likely to actually like question that and to try not do that work because they think, well, I should reject this authority because I'm being told to think critically. A child can't differentiate between this and an abstract questioning a narrative that's being brought by your parents, because firstly that takes a more developed mind to do. So I think that's to be clearly characterized. It means things like shouldn't question things. It means things like less worth ethic. It means things like potentially more danger for children if they're ignoring parents, and absolutely it means communication breakdown and poor parental relationships, and that's why we thank you to vote OO. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speech, and now well, the second thing report hour.
2 points in my speech. The first one, why children are now going to get out of horrible situations that many of them suffer today. And the second one, why we're going to have just a better world in the long term when you consider how adults are going to act. Followed the just many rebuttals, clarification about this debate. We believe that all schools should teach what we're saying. Obviously, sure, there are some religious schools that may not, it doesn't affect the motion. But moreover, when we tell you that each and every school should do that even if I send my child to a religious school, he will still hear about how he should be skeptic toward his parent, we think that's great. We do not encourage specifically progressivism or conservatism. We just think that when the child considers the opinion of his parent, he doesn't need to only think he knows best. He knows everything. We want him to now be more skeptical, and we think that's great, right? And we just moreover, we made a clear distinction between obeying a parent and being skeptical about opinions. And then tell us, but no, now children will do more drugs and drink more alcohol. They know that if they do those kinds of things, they will go to jail. They always hear stories about people that died because of those kinds of things. Obviously, if they want to do drugs, they will do it on the comparative as well. We just think that in other situations where they are less likely to be skeptical because of the of how those parents influence them, this is when you actually change how they act. Again, but they want to do now they won't go out late and this kind of stuff. They just know that the parents can then punish them. They can tell them afterwards, you now be in your room. So the child is still afraid of the kind of an authority his parents could have over him, but in simple conversation, when his parent is unlikely to actually punish him, this is when he is more likely to act, and we think this is great for the debate. Great. And okay, so let's now be very clear, right? We think parents don't always want to be bad, and we agree with OO. We just think a couple of things about it. First of all, they themselves were raised by their parents, which means that even if their parents had a bad opinion and they were wrong, their children are likely to inherit this kind of a bad opinion or bad act and give it to their own children, right? This is when you have a long-term influence of a many generation of stupid ideas. We just think that it isn't necessary that everyone needs to go to sleep early. Children hate this kind of stuff, and we don't think that each and every children now needs to suffer and be awake less time and be less time with his friends simply because his parents had a bad opinion about this kind of things. Then they tell us, but no, there will be a breakdown. We just think it's wrong. Obviously, there are good relations. Parents want his child to love him. They're just likely to consider what the child wants. No one wants the children to be sad all the time, to cry all the time. They're just likely to try to find a solution. Tell them, okay, sure, maybe half an hour walk. This is when you get a delta in the happiness of children. They are now having a better quality of life, right? I mean, I think today children don't do this kind of stuff, and they tell us why you need to be pacifistic about parents. We teach general skepticism. We think specifically parents, as Danny analyzed, and he got no rebuttals about it, are unique in a couple of ways. A, from an early age, I'm just used to be reliant on my parents. Everything I need to do is about them, and so when I grow up, I'm used that what they tell me is right and what they tell me is need to be done. B, just people love their parents. They don't want to disappoint them. They don't want to do something that is bad to them. Even if you teach them general skepticism, they are unlikely to ever try to do it on their own parents, right? And this is exactly the kind of problems that we want to shift, because even if parents aren't bad, we just want their children to be more skeptical. Right. So, but we also think, this brings me to my next point, that there are many children that are just suffering today even more, right? There are children that are not allowed to go and meet any of their friends because their parents tell them to do so. There are children that are stuck in the home because their parents think that they shouldn't ever leave the house. Do we just think that there are many kinds of this situation? Think they are horrible. And note, children who were beaten by their parents are more likely when they grow out to also beat their parents. We think this kind of bad behavior is really like being inherited and move on. What do we actually change in this debate? We think that you need to notice a couple of things. Because of all of the things I told you, the children is unlikely to do a couple of things. A, is unlikely to even understand there is a problem because they think their parents knows best. They think that whatever their parents is doing is the right thing to do. B, even if he understands there is a problem, he is unlikely to act because he doesn't want his parents to be mad, because he doesn't want all those bad things to happen. So what exactly do we change? Many things. Now when I'm in class, I hear from my friends how they were skeptical about their parents and how they managed to do like a good delta from themselves. B, I'm likely to hear from my teacher about how I can communicate better with my parents, right? And obviously it's not going to be perfect. We have one teacher for all of the students, but at least you have some improvement. Now you have some more tools to speak with their parents. Just see, I'm more likely to understand there is a problem. My parent doesn't know inherently best. What's happened then? A couple of things. A, he can just try and speak with his parents, try to solve the solution. But B is more likely to just share it in class, make his teacher aware. He's telling him, look, from my teacher who told me my parents aren't always right. Here is a problem I'm encountering today. How can I fix it? This is when you are going to actually have the ability to solve it from the outside. Maybe you will be punished in a worst way, but the thing is they're already extremely suffering today. If you give them some kind of an out, some kind of ability to improve their lives, those are the people who are more suffering today. This is the kind of world we want to change because we give them a better ability and we just think that this delta is great. Before I continue, opening.
Yeah, sure. So why would it never occur to a child to not have racist opinions if their teacher is racist, if their community is racist, and they have no reason to ever question that idea in the first place?
Sure. In those kind of communities, you have a small delta. But let's look at the rest, right? Because many times there is one big school in a big area, right? And each person in the area has different opinions. When I go to this big school, we have many different kinds of teachers, like each teacher most of the time different opinion. In most schools, yeah? This is when I like to understand that I cannot, that I don't need to always follow my parents. My next point about the learning, right? Is all of these reasons I told you. About wanting to be like my father, not wanting to disappoint my mother, don't want to disappoint my mother. Because I'm just from 8 years old, I was raised by them, like to the same kind of opinions. It is unlike to change my opinion. And we see today that certain areas always vote the same way. You have certain neighborhoods that stay the same way, specifically because of the huge influence of specific parents, right? This is what we change. I'm more likely now to speak with my parents and tell them I'm skeptic about their opinions, and they have this kind of conversation where I understand that there is something wrong about them. I'm more likely than when I grow up to look and actually think, wait, maybe if they are wrong and it's important, because tell us it's good as it is. No, we want choices to be rational and free. Today the choices aren't free because I'm influenced to such a great extent specifically by my parents that I cannot do what is good for me, and I'm instead doing what's good for them because they tell me what's good for them, and I'm following them because of all those reasons. Now people are more likely to vote for themselves because they are skeptic, because they have more power over their own life, and they'll do a more rational and informed choice. Specifically the reason Danny told you. Now they are more likely to be able to understand, to be skeptic about other things, understand information better. We do two things. A, we help the children who are in the most dire need, and this is, we think, a great data, but B, create a better world with less horrible people who don't vote for what's really good for them. For all those reasons, please support.
And now the second speaker for you.
Ready to go? All right.
let's talk about the exact mechanism by which telling kids to be critical of their parents' views innately causes them to be less likely to actually obey them. Number one, if you're thinking about something actively and trying to come up with reasons and thinking about reasons why it might be wrong, you're more likely to come up with some reason why it is, why you shouldn't obey, right? Which I just think makes kids more unlikely to obey, right? That, secondly, and importantly, even if they don't disobey, they're more likely to hesitate in the obeying of it and maybe put up more resistance before they eventually give in. I'll talk about that more in my speech. But in direct response to opening government, right? What they tell us broadly, and the rest of it is like interwoven, is the idea that now we'll have kids more critically thinking of like parents' more controversial or racist views. I think number one, the impact of this is incredibly vague, and I'm not certain how much it really helps society based on what they've given us. But the problem is, first of all, children will never probably not understand what it means to be racist, considering the people around them are innately, probably also parroting those views. They don't know what racism is. They don't know what it is to be other or any of those problems. I think the mechanism by which they change those opinions is when an individual from an outside perspective comes in to talk to them about that. I don't think that's what we get from opening government. I don't think we really get it, those impacts, no matter how vague they are. So let's talk about what the trade-off is here, right? The trade-off is whether or not parents are better at deciding what is good for a student or for their children than a teacher telling the child to disobey, which I think is phenomenally hilarious. I think that, number one, why are parents just generally better decision makers? Well, Killian tells you stuff about experience and intelligence, but when compared to the teacher, they probably know their child better because they're not in a 1 to 20 scenario, they're probably in a 1 to 2. They probably care more about them directly and what happens to them because of the fact that, so they know more about what they want and what they need. They care about them more because of the fact that they're literally their child and they've got a biological response, but also they've probably got more exposure to that child, know that child better than your average teacher who probably only has them for maybe like a year of class time, if even, and consequently will be better at decision making. But that's not even necessarily the trade-off. We're not talking about teachers making decisions and parents making decisions. We're talking about teachers telling children to question those authorities. And I'm going to talk about that now. What's the problem in this debate? Well, fundamentally, kids do not understand a lot of the fundamentals as to why parents tell them to do certain things. A child does not understand what death is. A child doesn't know understand what sex is. A child does not understand basic concepts that they need to know. Likewise, they also cannot differentiate between these different things. They don't know when it is, what's the difference between not eating bad junk food and not getting in the car of a stranger, because they don't know what those impacts are or what those things fundamentally are. Consequently, the problem becomes that this happens under status quo, because children don't understand the justification of why their parents are telling them to do certain things. They often have a habit of resisting to some degree, right? We say that opening government makes all of these issues far worse at the point of which another authority in their life is telling them not to obey what their parents, or telling them to be super critical of what their parents are doing. Why is this the case, right? Basically speaking, teachers derive from the same authority that a parent does. They are smarter, more experienced, and they have the ability to punish you, right? They're derived from the same authority. So the general comparative here is children that would already listen to their parents and do stuff that their parents tell them to do, because if they're not, then they're not, it just doesn't have an impact. But also because the teacher's authority is the same. So if they're following what the teacher is saying, they're probably following what their parents are saying, right? Why is this important? Well, let's engage directly with what opening government give us. You can respond after this. What opening government give us about teachers just innately being better actors in terms of like bad parents. First of all, the problem is that when you're in a situation where those two authorities are clashing, I think in a lot of scenarios the parents might win out. As in, what happens if the teachers tell the child to do this thing and the parent tells the children not to listen to the teacher because it's undermining their authority, right? On our side of the house, because they're deriving the same authority, they're better at working together. It means that when a teacher has a complaint about maybe you should let your child out more, and they care about that sort of thing, they're capable of talking to the parent to some degree. And maybe the parent can be like, they actually have some form of disability, and consequently there's a reason why they're not allowed outside. Now the teacher gets that information the two are capable of sharing it. I think there is a much frostier relationship, at the very least, when the teacher is telling the child to actively disobey, and all the problems that you get like Killian tells you about, and I'll talk about more, happen, and the parent is frustrated what the teacher is telling. Yes?
Okay,
Okay, so at the start of the LO speech, we hear that they're taught critical thinking in literature classes anyway, and B, they can't differentiate and be critical about abstract concepts and parents in general. If that is true, then surely everything you're describing happens on your side of the house anyway.
So I can say that to some degree this debate could be considered to be marginal. I will admit that, but that happens then on both sides of the house. Both their impacts are. I think that when two massive authorities in your life do clash, I think that it makes it much more of a problem when two authorities that derive themselves from the same authority are fighting each other. I think it probably makes it problems that exist on our side of the house much worse. That's my response to that POI, right? So what happens when the parent or when the teacher is just an objectively better source of this sort of stuff? Well, the teacher's job is to step in situations where the child is directly abusive. If the child doesn't end up in the class because now the parent pulls them out of it in the first place because the teacher's constantly telling them and being a problem and stuff like that, I think in cases where they are immensely abusive and in like seriously extreme cases, you're less likely to get that interaction because the parent will tell them not to listen to the teacher and not share with all of these people, but second of all, maybe just pull them out altogether, and consequently you don't get any of the benefits that you get on their side of the house. So why is this impactful? Well, number one, Killian tells you about this on like 3 tiers, right? Number one, more danger. If a child is going to be more hesitant when deciding whether or not they're going to look both ways before cross the road, or maybe spend too long talking to a stranger because they're wondering whether or not this is a good thing, they're probably going to get maybe kidnapped or put in some kind of danger, and I think that that's generally a societal harm. Second of all, life quality. I think that when a parent tells a child not to eat trashy food because it'll make them sick or it'll make them ill or whatever, I think that you're more likely to get them maybe just sneaking that food in the first place and not telling the parents when you question their authority, and consequently you're more likely to make that child unhealthy and make that child less happy and make people less happy in general. Also in terms of work ethic and making them do their homework, they're more likely to not do it on their side of the house. But thirdly and finally, just in terms of communication, with the parent will get their way no matter what, but have to yell at the child over and over again, I think that makes that relationship less frosty at the point at which those people feel a lot worse, have to have a much less trustful relationship, and are worse off. Look, we talked to you about danger, we talked to you about life quality, we talked about communication. Please oppose.
Yeah, I'll just take some time. So they don't go all over the place. This is fine. Okay. Okay. Panel, our case in CG today is going to be that the way in which this motion is likely to be implemented helps students in developing their own opinions regarding career and life choices which parents often have a monopoly on in the status quo. We're going to also explain why this is pertinent to some people, some children in society more than others, i.e. women and girls in the developing world as well. Our extension in terms of new material, we think that OG rely on large, perfect, society-wide implementation for their case to work. What we're going to do is explain why the internal decision making and the internal perception that children and teenagers have changes and how that benefit occurs, and we're also going to rely on more comparative and specific benefits as to how specifically this motion exactly will help children in terms of their thinking. Firstly, I'm going to do a few pieces of framing, and then I'm going to talk about why the comparative is better, 5 discrete impacts there. But firstly, in terms of framing, what is this motion actually going to look like and how will teachers actually implement this? realistically, we don't think that teachers are going to implement this in a harmful or clashing way. They're not actively going to say, go and disregard your parents and go and do all of these bad things. We're going to really, be really harmful about that. There are a number of reasons as to why that's going to be the likely way that happens. Firstly, because a lot of teachers are parents and that they mostly have an interest in, making sure that those kids don't go home and disregard their parents in a way that they wouldn't like to be disregarded, or at least a lot of parents or a lot of teachers just have experience with children in general. But secondly, because teachers are incredibly close with their students and they care about them and their educational prospects after school, right? They don't want their kids to be taken out, or they don't want their students to be taken out of school, or they don't want their students to be at risk of not staying in school. So this means that the way in which they're likely to teach it is like ways about saying things like about career choices and like not things like go out and drink and disregard your parents and don't listen to them when they talk about your curfew or whatever. But thirdly, we also just think, we just don't think that teachers want their kids to rebel in a harmful way, because that is harmful to their children, who they care about and who they care about their educational prospects about specifically. So the way in which these lessons are likely to happen are likely to look like things like challenging career paths that your parents have been telling you to do all of your life, thinking about what sort of life that you want to live, adverse to what your parents are telling you. It's not likely to say things like disregard your parents rules that they have for you specifically. They're more likely to be specific lessons. Note that opening government didn't really give what those specific lessons are likely to look like. We also think, we also just think in general they're likely to take place in informative sessions, and this is a fair likelihood because we think this believes that motion. We think that that's how it's likely to look like specifically. We think that realistically, on the comparative, without these sort of lessons, kids are more likely to still rebel like they do in the status quo, but they're more likely to do it in ways that are in ways influenced by what their peers are doing as opposed to what they're learning in school. This looks like the status quo in terms of kids going out and drinking all night, or going out and partying, or doing those things in the common ways in which teenagers normally rebel. We think if they're taught to rebel, or if they're taught to go against their parents' teachings in a different way from the way that they've been growing up all their lives, we think they're less likely to make those sort of decisions when they're 15 or when they're 16 and faced with some sort of drugs at a party or something like that. We think that that's pretty important. Before I go on, I'll take a POI. You guys had those POIs?
One teacher explains to young children, as OT seem to characterize, about career paths in the future. I think it looks very different, for people at young age where this can have the biggest impact.
I think realistically, even if it we just think that even if it does look different at a younger age, we think it's more likely to be you can be anything when you're younger. Like telling a little girl who's been forced into going into a certain career path when she's younger, just saying to her, you can be anything. That's a pretty simple thing to teach to children. We think even though it does get more intense as you grow up, we think it's still pretty fine to teach to children. Let's talk about 5 discrete impacts as to why specifically this comparative is better on our side of the house. Firstly, let's talk about pushy parents, or parents who push children into specific career paths or life goals. Those parents are likely to push kids into careers that they often don't want to do, maybe because the parent couldn't do it when they were younger, or maybe because there are other reasons there. But secondly, maybe because there are cultural values on certain careers, in terms of these are often generational, in terms of if you come from a family of lawyers, you're likely to be pressed into being a lawyer yourself, or if you're from a culture that sort of values those specific careers above any other type of careers, then we feel like that's likely to be a career that you're pushed into explicitly. We also think that in general, these types of parents affect women and girls more disproportionately than any other types. Women and girls are more likely to be expected to be forced to have more kids and not enter the labor force or not pursue higher education, specifically in the developing world. So what are the specific impacts of this likely? Firstly, we think that kids are more likely to engage in kids and teenagers are more likely to engage in dialogue with parents who are trying to push them into these type of careers. We think that realistically, we disagree with the fact that there's going to be a breakdown of dialogue, because we think that when a kid has been learning something ever since they've been younger, and then at the age 15 their parents are why aren't you going to law school? We think that realistically a kid's going to be no, I've learned from the age of 2 or from the age of whenever I entered school that it was that I had all of these different career paths open to me. Why should I do this? Why am I doing this? Why are you making me do this? We think that the kids are more likely to fight back in that specific way. And we think we think the majority of students whose parents are likely to be kind of pushy but not that pushy are more likely to be able to break out of that. But even if their parents are still incredibly pushy and still want them to go into those specific careers, or still force them to do that, firstly we think it's not that many parents, probably about 10% or even less, but we think realistically at least that kid kid now has more knowledge about the types of opportunities that are available to them, and are now more knowledge about what they want and have thinking about themselves and their life choices. We think that that's incredibly important because that has a massive generational effect in terms of they're less likely to push their kids into going into that sort of career, or their friends around them even, they're more likely to talk to them about wider career choices. We think this has a massive effect like that, especially because of the fact that kids spend so long in school. So they spend, like 8 hours a day there. We think like from the age of like 4, we think that that's an incredibly large chunk of their time for that information to sink in. And even if they have a different teacher every year, which we kind of think is like different because teachers are kind of like there's not that many teachers in every school. So we think that people are still quite close to them. Anyway, we also just think in general, the individual preferences are satisfied more in society in terms of goals and careers, and people are more happier in life in the types of jobs and the lives that they're leading, and or even the type of person that they know themselves to be. And in terms of women and girls who face parental and family pressures, we think this is incredibly important for them, and it benefits them because now they feel like they can have more options and that they don't have to do things like not enter the labor force or feel oppressed or do that kind of thing, especially, and also pertinently because a lot of teachers are women in the first place anyway. We don't think they're likely to teach things averse to that. But firstly, but also you have the surrounding effect of other little boys around you, being kinder to girls that they know in future, in terms of thinking that they can also be a different type of person, or they can live their lives. We think this is the type of skepticality that we're talking about in terms of being skeptical against the life that your parents are forcing you to have. And we also just think in general, women are more likely to pursue higher education than they were comparatively otherwise. We think this is a very comparative debate, and on the comparative, we are winning. Thank you, and we beg to your first.
I'd like to very much. And now I would like to my third speaker for the opposition.
I'm opposition member, and still I don't know exactly how will the proposition's work look like if we pass the motion. We hear something from CG, how the incentive for teachers to do good is there, okay, but we don't really hear any specifics. How exactly are they going to teach children to disrespect authority of parents or be critical of them or whatever? The single thing we hear is that they're going to teach them how that they can have, challenge the career paths the parents have set up on them. And this applies to only a small proportion of all the children, and it doesn't cover the rest of the debate. We have no idea what we're talking about. But still, there are some things that can be said about this abstract notion of criticizing, and specifically on the example they have said on challenging career paths. One, we say that it's already being done, and it's being done indirectly, right? Children are being taught about what kind of careers exist. They are even made to fill out tests so they can match them to the best jobs, and stuff like that, right? Secondly, we say that that same goal can be achieved through other means, even if you don't systematically have it in the school curriculum, right? Especially when closing says that children and teachers have this really close relationship and everybody cares about each other. Okay, so children can approach the teachers individually, discuss this issue with them, or discuss the issues with friends or with other things, or whoever, the rest of the society, right? They never prove to you how uniquely that they are proving the motion they want to be proving. But second point of rebuttal, even if we take them at their best, right? When they say, yeah, in our world, and notice they're basically exclusively talking about career paths. In our world, they say children are going to be determined too much by their parents, right? Firstly, we say, okay, where is the harm, right? Children are going to be determined by some factor anyway, right? Whether be it friends, be it the society, the salaries of the jobs they're going to have in the future, how is the job valued in the society as a whole. The pressure always comes from someone, right? They never show to you why the pressure they get from parents, it's so bad. We say that comparatively, it's more likely to be good pressure, right? Why? Because the parents are the ones who have raised the children, who have lived with them their entire life. Some of them may be completely fucked up and crazy, but we say that the majority of them care about them. And this and this feeds into the same logic that the closing is using, right? If they say how teachers care about their children because they spend so much time with them, then of course parents should care about their children even more, right? So on this notion, I honestly believe that the entire proposition bench is dead.
no, so the first point was how it is really unclear about what they're talking about, and secondly, I believe that the issue we have with proposition is that they never actually tell you what is the problem we have in this debate, right? Because when it comes to older children, as the OG also talked about, we believe that OO sufficiently prove that they learn criticism through other ways, digital, etc., right? But when it comes to the younger children, we believe that like this is what the debate should probably be about, right? How do we teach these younger children to be critical, or should we teach them in schools? And here on OO, we already hear some biological explanation how those children cannot be taught because their brain is not developed enough. And like we think that these kind of things are difficult to be proven in debate, so we're going to tell you how it happens. And this is the proof of what the biology says. We say that small children, the ones who, as we say, are not capable of thinking critically, are being bombarded by information that is set in black and white terms anyway, right? In the status quo, the fairy tales we feed them, the cartoons, they have good and bad characters. The subjects that are being taught in schools are all without, all taught in absolute terms. They're being taught languages, they're being taught maths. Only at a later age, they learn the stuff that is critical. And because of that, we say that when you teach those smaller children of critical thinking, of, whatever that means, so, the children are more likely to take it as an absolute truth, right? Because everything around them is giving to them as an absolute truth, something that is absolutely true. Now, where is the harm in that? We see that the harm is that then the children are essentially forced to choose between the authority of the parent and the authority of the teacher, right? Because one of them has to be wrong and one of them has to be right. This is how those children think. This is how they're being bombarded to think. And basically our extension is that this antagonization of parents and children is then harmful, right? And we don't think that this antagonization only comes from the children, but also from the parent side, right? If parents know that in the schools, children are being taught that their authority is being challenged, we say that those parents are then less likely to trust the teachers, less likely to talk to them, and this is especially important when it comes to the most problematic parents, right? If you antagonize the parents from the teachers, you're less likely to discuss development issues the children have with the parents, and this is what leads to the harmful development of parents. But essentially, no thank you. But essentially, the other negative harms of this antagonization, the children are being forced to choose, and that parents are moving away for teachers, are also other, right? Firstly, we say that children might have issues in schools, right, with bullying, with bad teachers, and also they might have issues at home, right? That is why it is necessary that the cooperation between parents and teachers exists, which we believe is the comparative in our world, right? Well, what we would like is, to have parents and teachers propping up each other's authority. In their world, you have less of that, because if you have issues at school, you're less likely to approach the parents to seek help. Yeah.
Don't you think parents should explain more about the reasoning for their directives, like eating habits, so that kids are more likely to obey non-arbitrary directions?
Yeah, I think that the parents explained this in status quo because children get critical as they grow older. Okay, the second element that is probably more important is that children have important things to learn when they're young from both of the actors, right? In children, when they're in schools, when they're being taught how to do maths, language, or whatever, and especially at home, right, with primary socialization, right? And here we say that if the parents are bad, you're going to probably be fucked up anyway, right? But the important issue is that you're less likely to, the thing I'm trying to say is that the impact they're not proving to you that that they can affect the socialization to that degree that is essentially being harmful. Whereas we believe that there are important things that you need to learn from both of the actors, and therefore you shouldn't encroach upon the authority of anyone. And thirdly, we say that that's it. Because of all those reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Thank you for the floor. Panel, the reason we made this debate, a debate about career pathways and higher educational prospects, was simply because things like, for example, political beliefs and religious values are broadly determined by much larger exogenous variables. And secondly, that teachers don't want to, we agree, but we think it's less important for that reason. In general, panel, teachers do not want to clash explicitly with parents for the explicit incentives which Nicole gives you as to why, for example, they themselves might be parents and probably won't pass on messages which would directly annoy them if they were parents, and that they know the things which CO tell you, that is to say that you need some degree of parental cooperation in order for the educational process to function. I'm going to do 3 things for you in this whip speech. Firstly, reiterate what our extension was, why it was more important than our opening. Secondly, respond to the 2 opposition teams, closing and then opening in that order. Panel, I think we told you 2 big things. Firstly, highlighting exactly what the comparative was, and secondly, how exactly that interacts with career choices later on. On the comparative panel, we told you that on their side of the house, teenagers in general tend to rebel and tend to learn how to question parental authority, and the specific ways in which they tend to question authority based on the way they learn that from socialization with their peers tends to be the worst. That means doing things like drinking and going out late, taking drugs with their friends, falling into peer pressure when it is the case their peers are pressuring on them to do just that. Conversely, panel, we tell you that given the fact that teachers already talk about things like careers in school, it is important for them to question what their parents specifically pressure them into doing, because they have the greatest capacity to influence students' decisions at this specific point in their life. On careers though, panel, and briefly to respond to the POI which Nicole gets, that obviously you're not telling 5-year-olds about their career pathways. Our case is just most pertinent in 16, 17, 15 age bracket. I mean, they're told other messages when they're younger, but obviously that just doesn't apply to our case. On careers though, panel, firstly, the overall logic was that parental push creates a harm for several big reasons. For example, the fact that, parents like to live vicariously through their children when it was the case that they couldn't do something earlier on due to whatever reason that caused them to not doing that. For example, if they had a child at a young age and therefore they feel like they have a right to push their child into doing the thing which they themselves are not able to do as a result of that. Secondly, people for various reasons have certain cultural perceptions of what it means to be a good person, have a good career, which oftentimes look like pushing people into being a doctor or a lawyer. I think the obvious response to this might be like, well, maybe, they'll be an artist or whatever, but I think oftentimes these people, it's the trade-off between being an accountant or a management consultant, and one of these careers I've talked about specifically, individuals can derive so much more satisfaction from one of the alternatives that they would likely choose otherwise. But even if they're an artist or whatever, they'll probably derive a great deal of satisfaction from that, because that is something which they themselves deeply value and want to do, and are probably aware of the various trade-offs associated with going down a career path like that. But on selection of these of career pathways, educational prospects, teachers do know better because they have more information, as CO concede, regarding the tests these kids take, what things they're specifically good at, what sort of things they value based on in a career dimension because of how they interact with them in class. Note, panel, that career choice is like such an important part of individuals' lifestyles and their identities that it is so important that they are pushed into a thing by an actor which is the best possible relevant knowledge to their making that decision, because you derive so much less utility from going down the wrong career path, and you are probably a lot worse at it because it is true that you have just done something which you buy into less. We also told you, panel, that women, specifically in the developing world, but it's also true in the developed world where they might have fewer children, are more likely to participate in the labor force to a comparatively greater degree. This is incredibly valuable for these women who probably have more income in this world, have more autonomy by virtue of having simply less children and therefore having less time being pregnant and so on. But it's also the case that by virtue of doing this, countries tend to develop comparatively better as far as women are now participating in the labor force, becoming more educated, the supply of labor is higher, and things like that. We got no pushback from CO, so we presume they agree with us on this in this regard. Panel, we are specifically better than our opening as far as mentioned in the intro. We agree with them in all things they describe, but we think much bigger things determine whether or not children come forward and talk about abusive instances in the classroom, and indeed their values and stuff like that. Before I respond to the 2 opposition teams, I'll take CO.
They never explain to us what is the difference between status quo teachers talking to their pupils and the world that they're defending. No explanation, no delta, no impact, automatic.
Okay, no. That's obviously not true. Well, so firstly, Nicole does literally tell you how, like, in the classroom they might be like, look, maybe think about what you yourself value and question what your parents are specifically telling you and how they push you into careers and stuff like that. But moving on to CO panel, and this is one of my big criticisms of their case, is that they say that we don't tell you how specifically they do it, even though OG give a model and we give you even more mechanisms to how teachers specifically would do this. Then, in order for all of CO's case to work, they assume that they do it in the absolute worst way possible in order to get their benefits. What are the two arguments that were unique and substantive in their case specifically? Firstly, that when you're teaching critical thinking at a young age, it will be so absolute and binary that these little 5-year-olds will go home and be like a Socrates of the household, questioning every single decision that their parents make and stuff like that. But that's just obviously not true in the way this be implemented. Realistically, as Nicole tells you, it's probably while simple messages, not like that confrontational and aggressive, things like, you are who you are, be that, things like, not listening, things like that, I guess. I'm deeply unclear as to what the specific incentive of teachers in this regard is to do it in the manner which they describe. I'm deeply unclear as to why teachers have an incentive to teach just 5-year-olds to do the specific thing that they want them to do in order for them to get that impact in terms of 5-year-olds, I guess, questioning every single decision which they make. I feel like that response is a little bit glib, but the argument itself is a bit absurd, so I'm not sure how much more, how further deep I can go into it. The second argument they actually give in substantive is on cooperation with schools. I would note firstly this argument is to some extent non-comparative insofar as the most problematic parents tend to get very annoyed when teachers are critical of them, and they usually suggest maybe there are things going wrong in the household for why their kids are getting bad grades, and they do not respond well to the school system for other reasons, for example the fact that they themselves had bad interactions with the school system. So I'm unclear as to what the specific benefit is there with those sorts of problematic parents. In terms of parents who are problematic because they believe things that are crazy, they probably are homeschooling.
The assumption on both proposition benches is that there is some inherent value to some authentic opinion of a child, that there exists such an authentic opinion, either be it their political belief or be it their true calling in career choice. There's two problems with that, and Rourke is the first one to actually address that in his speech. First of all, they never explain to you why such an authentic opinion actually believes. What we tell you in closing opposition is that all that you assign value and meaning to is proposed to you culturally, ideologically, etc. There is no neutral, no universal. There is no objective true career choice that a child could have. There is no objective political ideology a person would possess. That being said, then, they never explain to us why we should give a crap about the authentic, true experience of a child. They never tell us why it is so bad that a child is indoctrinated. Because there's two options now. So a child is indoctrinated by parents into following some career path, following some political belief, happens probably often. Okay. If the child dislikes the indoctrination that the parents are putting on that child, then there is no delta in this motion, because the child is already aware that what their parents are telling them is not okay, and the child, there is no delta here because, as every team in the debate agrees, there is still punitive measures to force someone to do something. For instance, My parents for 1 year forced me to study law. It was a big fail. I knew that they were wrong, but it was nothing that I could do to force them, because the delta for me was, if you don't do that, we're going to stop sending you money, which is not something that they can change on their side of the house. The other alternative, though, is where children like indoctrination, where children enjoy, like actually believe in what their parents are feeding them. If someone actually believes and is successfully indoctrinated by their parents, is there even a problem with that? I mean, what we tell you on CEO is that they're going to be indoctrinated by someone, like either by capitalism, their teacher, their religious leader, anyone. And the thing is that no one in government ever tells us what is so problematic about status quo, what is so problematic by the option that the parents indoctrinate those children, that they should change it, that they should try to do something. And this is uniquely brought to you by Rock. Even if, though, they would manage to prove that, they didn't. At no point did they even try to do it, because they just assumed that indoctrination is bad, some liberal capitalist propaganda. Even if they proved that, they never explained to us what is the delta. OG comes to us and somehow explains to us that an apolitical universal school is going to prevent people from following populism in the world where populists like Charlie Kirk are already saying that the school system is progressively biased. So no reason why the delta here actually exists. On closing opposition, they are literally what they stand for is career counseling. Literally, that is the whole model that they have. Clearly not the motion that we're debating here, because the thing is, we already have that in status quo. It's not very effective in my opinion, but I'm not sure how what they are proposing is any better. Okay, so basically from closing opposition, you get the, breaking down the overall assumption of all the government's team. We are taking down the whole proposition bench. What then is the constructive material that we bring, and how does it differentiate us from opening opposition? The thing that we focus on is the parent-teacher dichotomy. And we admit, to an extent, DLO tries to talk about that. However, the DLO has a very, I would say, generic, behavioristical, psychological analysis of, how parents are going to get butthurt, yada, yada. And I think this is not I'm personally biased as a continental speaker against that, because I think that that's such, Iona psychologisms are not something, I just don't prefer it, right? And I think that what Rock and I do is actually much, much better, because it is structural. Because what they rely on having butthurt parents, right? And the thing is that perhaps some parents are just phlegmatic, don't give a crap, yada yada. We tell you that the children make this dichotomy really problematic. And this is the crucial, unique premise that Rock brings into this debate. Because Rock explains to you that when you're a child, and this debate is mostly about probably under 10 children, something like that, because teenagers are already less impacted in this debate. When you're under 10, right? You're watching the Red Riding Hood, the world is very simple to you. There's good guys and there's bad guys. Christopher Columbus, to me when I was young, was presented as a great guy. He sailed, found America, things like that. Everything is either good or bad, black and white, because as a child, you're not really intellectually capable of understanding the nuanced analysis, for instance, closing opposition brings to this debate, but furthermore, you are fed throughout your life, like the opening tables in this debate, very simplistic black and white analysis with no real comparison or analysis on a spectrum. This is why, thank you, I'll take opening a bit later on. This is why, as a child, when the teacher, if we assume that they have an actual model with a delta, if a teacher would actually go and start challenging the parental authority, there's two options. Either the child who doesn't like their parents that much sides with the teacher and is like, fuck you parents, or the vice versa. And I think this is majority example is true, because fuck the teacher, parents are much more close to children usually, that the child is just not gonna trust the teacher anymore. Either of those scenarios is true, and this is the only impact that we actually bring to you in this debate and closing opposition, because every other impacts are pretty much minutiae or something like that. Before I continue, yeah.
Sure. Many external things influence choices. A major one is parents. We explain why choices will be more free and more rational when you change how children act.
Choices are not free currently because parents have punitive measures, but in terms of intellectual freedom of whether you have authentic decision making, we tell you that no choice is inherently free, because you're already subject to some ideology, yada yada. We had our Žižekian intro previously. What are the impacts of children not trusting either their parents and their teachers? First of all, the whole issue of trust. Either if they don't trust their teacher anymore, we take the impact of OG, because if they now don't trust the teachers anymore, they're not gonna come to the teachers when they're beating up. Or if they don't trust their parents anymore, they're not gonna come to the parents when they are bullied in school. Like already this is really problematic. Also the second thing that Rock spoke about is like the emotional burden of having more complicated relationship. But finally, this is again something that Ryan really ignores on government whip, that like the important things that parents teach you have to be dogmatic, must not be questioned. Like the basic morals that I'm taught as a young child, they cannot be explained. Like the thing is, when you think about the most basic things we believe in terms of morality, you are not going to justify them to a 5-year-old kid. The 5-year-old kid needs to believe in those, needs to follow those, and must not ever question those. And because of all those reasons, I think it's quite clear on closing opposition, we take this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil's speech. After the close round,